Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Irene Moncada, an Events Commissioner here at Unicom Seminars. We are pleased to be hosting a webinar titled No Managers, Myth or Reality When Scaling Agile. The webinar is presented by Tony Grout. Tony Grout is Head of Agile Transformation at Skype, where he brings enterprise agility to a fast-paced, fast-growing organization with over 1,500 engineers. His 30-year passion has been to build products that make a massive positive impact on society. At this point, I would like to hand over to Tony. There will be opportunities for your questions and answers at the end of the presentation. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and we welcome your feedback. Over to you, Tony.
Good afternoon, everybody, or wherever you are in the world, morning or evening. So what I'm going to talk about over the next hour, and hopefully there'll be we'll make some time for some questions at the end within that hour, is to talk about this idea that we're hearing more and more about, the concept of hashtag no managers, or the concept of no managers in organizations, and the reality or the myth of that particular phrase that we see. If you do a search on Twitter right now for managers, there's an awful lot of noise about it. There's a lot of articles about it. A lot of in-flight magazines now starting to talk about this idea of no managers. And we're hearing organisations such as Semco in Brazil, also hearing people like Zappos, the shoe retailer in the US, being talked about as examples of where there's no managers. And also we're also hearing about the concept of holacracy, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about as we go through. But I thought it'd be worthwhile talking about this idea and exploring it a little bit more with everybody, and what we're finding and what my experience to date has been about this idea of having no managers and what I'm seeing. So I'd like to share that experience with you. The first thing I'd say is if an alien landed today and they read the books on Agile, for example, and they took out all the books you could find from the library, they downloaded them, they got an Amazon account and they got them shipped using some drone, apparently these days we're going to be shipping with, then what they'd start to see is, they'd start to see that if you look at the role definitions, there's no real concept of manager in any of the books, certainly in all the popular books you'll read. And even the frameworks tend to miss out this idea of having a manager. If you look at Scrum, for example, I'm a big user of Scrum inside of Skype, in what a lot of the organisation is very focused around the use of this Scrum way of being, that manager doesn't exist as a role. So that leaves us with our first dilemma, is that as we look into the world of Agile and the world of responsive engineering and responsive product development, there is no definition for what a manager should do in that context. And it kind of leaves you thinking, if you read all the Agile books, etc., that the world is a perfect sphere, that all these these teams create amazing technology, they work together, we all work on the Chrysler project, which is the project that we hear about described from XP, or some of the Scrum projects, etc., or other projects where we've heard Agile has been successful. And again, there's no concept of manager in some of these conversations that we see. So the world looks like this perfect sphere. It looks like, you know, all the problems are easily maintained, and the Agile frameworks cover all these concepts. So do we need managers? You know, are they relevant now? If the Agile community seems to have decided that we can get by without them based on the books that we read, is that true? Looking at the frameworks, or does it just have nothing to say about the role? Is that where we're going with what the Agile books are saying? They're leaving it out because they've literally got nothing to say. Well, if we start off by what do we see as the alternatives to having managers, maybe we can explore this together right now. And we see a chart that would look like this, where you'd have, without managers, you'd have the CEO, and then you'd have all the teams in the organisation, which, okay, if you have 10 teams, you can probably 10 Scrum teams, you can get away with that kind of number maybe. Reporting to the CEO feels very small, lean, startup-y kind of organisation. And you can probably get away, you can all look and see each other just down the open space, red brick building that you're all doing a big startup in. It's a reasonable size, but all can see each other. Maybe that's feasible. And it is feasible. We see organisations of this kind of scale without necessarily having any formalised concept of a manager role. If you look at that though from an organisation with 2,000 people, which is where Skype is today, or organisations bigger than Skype, if you then expand it out to the whole of Microsoft, or you look at someone like IBM, where I led the Agile transformation from a Leadership Council perspective for Agile for a couple of years, in that, and was involved in that there, where there's 25,000 people in the labs building software and software product. The reality of this just seems to just fall apart at that point. The idea that you can't, there's no management structure to get all between the CEO and the teams feels uncomfortable, and I think we should explore that a little bit more. So if you look at it, the first thing that you have to have if you have no managers is you have to have teams that love each other, that all get on, and that everybody is trying to get to the same goal. And typically in most organisations we have an overall organisational goal, but there's always some friction between teams trying to make more progress to get some things done, and trying to get some scarce resource or people or access to test environments that create friction between teams. So much as we start off on the basis of, and certainly from an Agile thinking, where we start off on the basis of everybody tries to turn up to work to do a good job, what this is leading us to think about is the fact that teams are going to have some friction between them. So, okay, maybe there's something there that needs to happen to try and reduce that friction. And there is the first role of the manager you might think about, is a friction reducer between various teams to get the organisational thinking rather than the specific team thinking. Deming had something to say about this. He said that systems with components, the components tend to optimize for their own. They become selfish if allowed to inside a system. So you need to have something that balances that selfishness. And I think that's the role we see right now with the role of a manager in some of these larger organizations, where there is this friction, where there is contention for scarce resource between teams. So they've got some value still to add there, is what I'm seeing. So you've also got potentially the role of project manager, scrum master, or manager. So the PM role, or whether you have a PM or a manager, or both. The scrum master, some people get this confused with the scrum master role. There is potentially some overlap between a manager and the scrum master. What we tend to see is, as the organisation scales again, the scrum masters again are much more focused on making sure the team itself is successful and trying to, wherever possible, remove the friction within the teams. And if the teams work with more traditional project managers doing more waterfall type projects, they're also trying to work out how to interact with those individuals. But the manager, if you like, there is also potentially another manager role trying to manage the friction again between the teams, and also the traditional project managers who are trying to do some of the operational content that we see. So again, the manager in the organisation of a scaled organisation is likely to have to deal again with friction removal. They are there to make the system more effective, which is what we see when you think about, if you look at the lean manufacturing, which is the Toyota, the whole thing you'll hear about Toyota. The Toyota concept is, I was speaking to somebody recently who was saying that the line in Toyota, it's one of the Toyota factories that he was visiting, that line stops 7,000 times a day by pulling the andon cord. And what they do when they pull the andon cord on the line is, one of the workers on the line has seen that there is a potential improvement that could be made. And what they do is they don't just make the improvement, they get the manager to come along. Now the manager isn't more important than them, but the manager is there to look at the system and say, okay, if you improve that, let's look at what the whole impact on the system might look like. So again, this idea of somebody systemically looking at the organisation above the team is something that I think we've got to be careful we don't lose if we start to just move away from the concept of a manager role. The other thing we start to look at is this whole idea of culture and how there's some quite complex dynamics in certainly larger organisations have some challenges here. Small organisations have similar, but again, less scale. So you've got your team, you've got the marketplace, which has got a lot of dynamics and complexity going on. You've got your organisational dynamics and the friction we've already talked about. And then you've also got challenges necessarily with suppliers. So the friction that might be, maybe you're doing some outsourcing of certain componentry, or they're delivering some hardware as part of this service to you, or maybe they're delivering code, specialist code skills or test skills, etc., that you're looking for, the test skills you haven't got internally. Again, the manager role is useful in this context. My observation is that they can be useful again in the systemic, looking at this wholeness of the problem and getting the teams to work together, not solving the problems for the teams, but literally just stepping back, as you see a manager, a sports manager doing, is that they're normally not on the field. Most managers aren't on the field. And when they're not on the field, they have the line of sight of the whole sports field to be able to see what the plays are that are going on and see where the weak spots are. And again, if you look at it in the cultural context, a manager stepping outside of the teams gets to see the culture of the organisation. More than likely, probably more effectively than somebody sitting within the teams who can only see the next level, the next team beyond them. It's much more difficult in a large-scaled organisation to see beyond where you currently are, see the next hilltop. Then you've got the whole complexity problem. So then you're just looking at how complex it is with the various supplies, living componentry, the marketplace, your organisation, all these bringing risks into the organisation. So there's a whole risk, wherever these intersect, is where we see both opportunity in terms of potentially some innovation can take place whenever things overlap, but also with that comes risk. And here we have the innovation thinking that says wherever you've got new technology, other industries, your organisation, there's intersection of those things. Again, that innovation has incredible value, which is why you want to allow some variability into your way of working, into your product, because variability allows us to create innovation. Without variability, all we're doing is manufacturing the same thing again and again. We need to be able to look at the risk of bringing that innovation into the organisation. And again, at the team level, it might look incredibly innovative and the right thing to do at the team level. But if every team is bringing in a level of risk of the risk that every innovation can bring, because innovation always brings risk, it's a set of experiments. If all teams are experimenting at the same level of risk, that could sum up to an awful lot of organisational risk at the systemic level that nobody has a direct line of sight of. And again, this is where the manager role can play a part in looking at what are the risk profiles in the organisation and being able to look at the context of risk across the system again. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So looking at risk, one of the things that a lot of people seem to forget is that when we're delivering complex software applications, when we're delivering innovation, what we're dealing with is, instead of dealing with a date, and across the bottom of this, the x-axis is time. So the likelihood of us to finish, this is what this graph is showing us, is the dotted line down the middle is the normal probability of the length of time this will nominally take us to get this project completed. The probability of completion is highest at that point in time. So if we get it done in the segment A under the curve, then we're getting it done early. If we get it done in the segment B of the curve, it's late. It's later than normal. So we're getting it done more early than normal before A, later than the nominal after B. Now that's not saying where we've committed to getting it done by. So the first thing is in Agile, we make a commitment on, ideally we make a commitment on the scope of what we're building and the time frame we're going to build it in, and those things end up being negotiated. We negotiate out scope based on time, is what we end up doing in the Agile model. What typically happens though when we look at this is, what we're trying to do is manage this risk curve. What we're saying is you're more likely, which is to be late than early. That's what this risk curve is telling us. This isn't me just making this up. This comes from Barry Beam. Many other people have come up with a similar model for how long it takes us to the probability curve of deploying complex software, building and deploying complex software. And what it says is, B says the area under B is where we are likely to be, the area under A is we're less likely because the area is smaller, so we're more likely to be late than early. So again, managers, who is looking at the whole system, when we try and put a whole application together where teams are having to cooperate together to build complex applications, the probabilities of us being able to deliver that increase. It makes it more likely that we'll be later, that is in the B area under that curve, than A. So again, managers are there to manage the probability curve for the organisation of shipping software. That is at a large scale. That is really where I see a manager having a significant role, is thinking about the systemic risk in the organisation to try and make sure that the probability of completing is closer to the dotted line and into the A segment of this curve than B, which is where we typically are. And so if you look at the likelihood of being late, most of us have experience of being on the B side of that dotted line. And this is what Agile allows us to do. So the manager has a fantastic set of tools that they can work with the teams with, which is the Agile Mirror. The Agile Mirror allows us to look at ourselves as an organisation and as a team within that organisation on a frequent basis. It's one of the hardest things that teams have to deal with when they go Agile, is they are starting to try and iterate, and that iteration is there to give them the feedback loop. So you get this feedback loop about how well things are going, and you get it very fast. You get it in Scrum, it's 4 weeks or less. You'll get a feedback say, are we on track to getting done what we think we're going to commit to getting done within the 4 weeks? Does that look good for us getting through the backlog of work we've got to get done? And again, in Kanban, where you're doing continuous improvement, you are reflecting on the throughput of your system, and you are doing that continuously. You will be using a mirror of some sorts to be able to demonstrate that, are we doing the right things in the right way? And the manager's there to encourage the team to look into that mirror firstly. So one of the experiences I had when I first joined Skype was I arrived, and the first comment I saw from a lot of teams when I arrived a couple of years ago was, we hate this thing, Scrum. It's stupid. It's just we continually seem to fail every time we do these sprints, and this is just causing so much aggravation. This Scrum way of working is just not working for us. So the interesting observation I started to make to the teams was, well, I kind of think it's working just fine. I think Scrum is not the problem here. I think the way you're working is the problem. And they said, but that's Scrum. And I said, no, Scrum is giving you a set of ceremonies and a set of guiding ways of thinking to try and make you more effective. Scrum is, yes, it has some ceremonies in there to get you thinking and to put some cadence into the way of working, to give you that time to build and then reflect and to get those feedback loops. But it keeps telling you things, and it's telling you things every 2 weeks. A lot of the Scrum teams we're trying to do 2 weekly sprints, 2 week sprints every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks they were just being told they're struggling with quality, they're not getting as much of the velocity is not as good as they would have liked it to be. Infrastructure issues weren't being addressed. They had lots of impediments that weren't necessarily being removed. And my comment at that point was quite interesting. What I said was, well, first of all, the teams in Scrum are responsible for trying to remove their own impediments and for trying to remove impediments before they occur. And the Scrum Master is there to try and encourage that to happen. The Scrum Master's role isn't just to remove all the impediments. They are there to encourage the team to do the same, and impediments that can't be removed, the Scrum Master will look and see what they can do. But they're in the team. When you start to think about outside of the team, how does that agile feedback loop get resolved? How do those impediments and issues get resolved again? Will they again need somewhere to surface up to? Now, go back to my original diagram of the organisational chart, lots of teams and CEO. The CEO cannot get together and solve all those issues. You could say, well, the team should come together and resolve those. And I think there is some merit in saying that they certainly should get together, and that's what the Scrum Master is there to do, is trying to encourage that dialogue. But in any typical large-scale system and even culture and society, there is typically a set of individuals who sit along outside of the direct system itself and try and mediate to get things to happen more effectively when the systemic issues occur. And again, we see that as the role of the manager at the moment in organisations at scale, where the teams again need that help to resolve their issues. The other thing they're there to do is to prevent the teams doing crazy things. So typically, if you look at some of the ways that Agile teams work, they have a backlog, they're trying to build a particular product, a feature set in an application, or in some organizations a set of componentry that's going to plug together into a bigger stack of deliverables if they're working more in a component-driven way with a feature team across the top. Quite many different varieties of Agile at scale in terms of organizational design. Somebody needs to be thinking about what are the constraints that the team is under. Now, one of the things we often talk about in Skype is that the manager's job is to set the constraints on the team, not to tell the team how to do something. They are there to set the boundaries in which the team can self-organize. And notice I say self-organize, not self-manage. Self-organize means they've been given an intent, which is the things they need to deliver for the organization, and they work with the product owner in the teams to do that, to set the backlog in the right way. And the backlog may well link up to a organizational backlog that will be prioritized in terms of things the organization wants to do to give you some team alignment. And then the managers will set if you like, a sandbox, a set of constraints that the team need to deliver to. So an example of that, and we'll go through a few examples in a moment, are they may say that the team must make sure that they use the standard set of security protocols that the organization mandates. They may also, and they are there to check at the end of the sprints and at whenever they deem it appropriate and necessary, to just be in the sprint reviews and see making sure that all the security policies, etc., that the organization needs to have in place have been met inside the application. For example, another example might be that they ensure that everybody's taking the appropriate amount of holidays, that nobody's immediately required for that country, that the welfare of the staff beyond the Scrum Master, what the Scrum Master can mandate, is being looked after. They're therefore making sure that hiring, that the hiring policies and procedures and legalities around hiring for the team, that the team have got somewhere to go to make sure all those things are being maintained and managed. Now, HR has some function in that, or personnel, as I prefer it, has a function in that, obviously. But they're not going to be able to do some of the look across the whole system and work out who should be doing what and going where. And again, that's where the manager, from a helping the teams to understand what available skills there are out there and what needs to be brought in, the managers can have some oversight across that from a risk perspective to see and help the teams work out how to best address any gaps in their capabilities. I'm going to talk about a bit more about that in a moment. Another example may well be that they need to set up the team so that they don't have any key dependencies on individuals, and again I'll move through that in a moment. But they're there to set the constraints that the team work within. How the team meet those constraints, and the one with, for example, the definition of done. The manager may, one of the ways we've been very thoughtful about getting some of the manager able to describe their constraints is we have the managers write down all the risks that they need to make sure are managed by the team, and then the team write their definition of done for each of the user stories. They write the definition of done that they're going to use for the user stories, looking at that risk list that managers need to make sure they've met, and writing down the definitions of done steps in there that will make sure that they've met the risk the managers have set. And that way you have a nice counterbalance of risk profile, somebody looking at the specific risk versus the team trying to get things done as quickly as possible within the context of a risk profile. And that works quite well. So one of the things we've established at Skype that managers now bring in, we have the lottery count that says if a team member decides that they're successful, that they won the lottery and they decide to leave, what state does that leave the organisation in? Well, if we use the Agile Mirror, and at the end of the week, that if the person disappears at the end of the next sprint, we've noticed using the Agile Mirror that it's highly likely that the throughput of the team, the velocity, will have dropped, or even not even been able to, or have gone down to zero, because that one team member was the only team member who knew something about a specific component or part of the code, or part of the infrastructure, the build system, any number of things that can be a key person dependency within that team. And we can see that very quickly in Agile, and the manager can see that also. So what can we do about that, and what is the things that the teams can start to do? One of the things we do at Skype is we have this idea of a key person dependency matrix, and the manager says to the team, okay, well, guys and girls, what I want you to do is we have all these components, so can you please write all the components across the x-axis at the top and write all your names down the left, and then score yourselves on how much you know about that component. 0 meaning I know nothing about it, to 3 I could rewrite it from scratch without any help on my own. And the team go through that exercise. They do it in a room as a meeting, all completely in the open. And then the manager will say, okay, so wherever we've got a component that's got, for example, here we've got the Z component, and the Z component is likely to be the highest risk one, because if and Chris is the riskiest team member right now, because if Chris leaves, he's the only person who could rewrite Z from scratch, and Jane is the only person who has a mild understanding. She knows it exists. A 1 is I know it exists kind of indication. Then the team are challenged to say by the manager at the end of a particular given period of time, they may say at the end of a quarter, 12 weeks, we need at least 1 more person up to a level above a level 1 who knows component Z, and you guys work out how you're going to do that. Now that's left to the team. The team then may, with Chris, may decide that Chris is going to pair with Jane is the quickest one maybe to get going, and they pair with Jane during the next few sprints to try and get Jane so that she can self-score to level 2. And it's all done using self-scoring. So the team then work that out, and it's worked out together, and they self-organise around addressing that particular constraint. So we rewind a little bit. The manager has set the constraint because he or she is managing the risk. So the manager comes in, she sees that there is this risk about the key person dependency on component Z. She then challenges the team to fix that, and then the team go and fix it, and then the manager, she will then review it during some of the retrospective at a given point in time, and then see whether the team are making progress against that. The other thing the manager is doing is the manager is also looking across other teams to make sure that the dependencies on other teams are also being managed. So what is going on above the radar? What is actually happening, so that they can see and advise their teams on the communications aspects of things that aren't just coming through. So if you look at all those dependencies and how those dependencies are managed, the manager's role there, using the Agile Mirror again, the manager can see that there's a team that's delivering really big batches to really, they're creating lots and lots of work in progress and building up lots and lots of work. And everything's getting slower and slower and slower, because nobody's looking at which team is causing the problems at the bottlenecks at the system level. And we've seen some of this in a number of organisations I've worked with, and Skype has had some of the challenges where teams they're doing what they perceive to be the right things, so that they're doing more and more work, but what it's causing is it's causing bottlenecks in the system. And nobody's really looking at that inside of the whole system level. But the teams themselves are maybe using theory of constraints at the team level, but when it looks at the organisational level, they're not looking at that. So again, when we look at it, we then start to say, well, the manager looks at and says, well, actually, team B here are delivering in really big batch sizes, and team A are delivering in very small batch sizes, and that's why the throughput of team A is significantly better. Nobody's looking at that across the system and saying, what are all these teams doing differently? What is actually happening? Now, again, they should be encouraging the teams to come together and sharing experiences. But it's very difficult when you're on the ground, on the field of play, and you're trying to score the goal or play a particular position, to actually be able to step back and see that there are other better ways of working. So again, the manager as coach kind of idea can, as they see other teams working, can be helpful and advise other teams. So the other thing we can do is we can look at how to manage the risk of things being delivered in a particular way. So one of the challenges that the manager again can put on the team, the set of constraints, is this idea of where is the biggest risk in our delivery of this project. Remember, going back to curve, the probability curve I showed you, there's more ways of being late than early. So let's remove as much uncertainty as we can as early as possible, because the sooner we remove all the uncertainty, the things we're not sure about, we become more predictable. And a lot of the Agile books don't really have much to say about this. They talk about, a lot of them use just refer back to do small iterations, and that you'll deliver things faster, and then you'll get feedback faster. In large systems, there is so much dynamics going on, there's so much complexity in a lot of these larger scale systems. What we found managers doing is now saying to the teams, we want you to deliver the highest risk, to trading off high risk aspects from a technical risk perspective to business value, and making that trade-off between those two, so that teams then start to build the highest risk things that add the most value to the business earlier than the lower risk, easier things to build. And the reason they're doing that, the reason they're building the highest risk things early, is because that, of course, increases predictability. We find out the things that are going to bite us later. And so the manager will say, I want all of the highest risk, all the risks, the technology risks taken out from this as soon as possible, and I want you to demonstrate at the end of each of the sprints how you're removing risk from the delivery schedule. One of the ways the teams can do this is they can use a matrix such as the one you're seeing here, which says these are some of the user stories, some of the risks, down the left hand, some of the user stories across the top on the x-axis, and some of the risks that the team has identified or the organisation has identified down the left-hand side with the manager for the application. And then the team simply mark which of the user stories, if they built and tested them fully, would address that particular risk and show that they've mitigated it or got rid of it. So, for example, if they want for story 2, if they completed story 2 and got it to done, that is, the definition of done was fully completed, it could be deployed, and it was done to the level of deployed, fully tested. Once they've got it to that point, the new UI framework has multi-platform issues. That risk has gone because they've done all the tests to prove that that risk no longer exists. So looking at that, the order in which the backlog would probably go if you were doing it from a risk-based perspective, technical risk-based perspective, you're likely to do story 3, then story 1, and then 2, 4, and 6 in any given order, depending on which ones you've already addressed, because it doesn't matter because you've already killed off all the risk. In fact, if you did story 3, you probably addressed all the risks anyway, so you're probably you're just going to do story 3 on the graphic shown here, and then it doesn't matter which order you do the others in because you've proven that you've addressed all 3 risks on the left-hand side. Of course, you need to trade that off with business value. So if you're trying to gain credibility early on in a project or product delivery cycle with your customer, you may say the biggest risk there is just to demonstrate some story that they've asked for to show that you are worth proceeding on with, in which case you'd write that on the left-hand side as one of your risks. You'd show which story would meet that risk, and you'd build that story out first to demonstrate that the project was worth carrying on with. And then you'd move on to the more technical risks. The key point here is the manager's role in this is to set the constraints of managing that the team they help the teams describe the risks, set the team the challenge to manage out the risks as early as possible, and then the team will use constructs like this, or the manager can coach them on constructs like this to be able to manage that. So, no managers in an organisation, from our experience, makes about the same sense at the moment as no testers is to teams. And what I mean by that is the idea of having testers in teams and individual testers is something that we all aspire to remove. We shouldn't need testers. If we all wrote perfect code, if we all tested our own code and built perfect code, we would know the concept of testing wouldn't need to exist. The fact is that we're human beings, and as the Dilbert principle says, we all do something stupid some of the time. We're going to need testers or certainly testing capability for some time. And I think it's going to be the same with managers for quite a while. I think the large corporates have got managers, they've got management structures. And the reality of removing those managers and just and saying you no longer need them is at best aspirational. we should aim for them not to be required, but we should make it very clear what their roles are. And I think the key role we should be focusing on, and it's what we spend a lot of time in Skype doing, is educating the managers on how they should be. They are risk managers to the organisation, and giving them both the skills to highlight and identify risks, all sorts of different risks, business risks, operational risks, project risks, product risks, market risks. At the same time, we should be looking at their ability to be able to have techniques to manage those risks using techniques that they can use to manage those risks. So that, for example, using the skills matrix I showed you earlier with the key person dependencies, using the risk profiles with the user stories along, with techniques to do that, using Socratic questioning to question teams, etc. So with that, I'm actually going to, I finished early in order to make sure we've got time for some questions. And I'd like to thank some of the people who've helped me along the way in the recent times, talking about the concept of some of the management ideas we've had. And also I'd like to say that no perfect spheres were harmed during this production of this talk. There are no perfect spheres out there as far as I can see, and managers are not going away soon in large corporates. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. Any more questions? So one of the questions that has just come in is, so where does the manager, is the manager of more than one team, only one team? Are they manager of Scrum Masters, or are they managers of developers? What would an organisational structure look like at Skype, for example, with managers in there? So a couple of different examples I've seen work, and the example I'll start off with is the one at Skype. So if you look at the way that Skype is organised, Skype has a set of Scrum teams, so between 1 and 3 Scrum teams. Those 1 and 3 Scrum teams have between normally six or 7 people in, some slightly smaller. And those together, each of them will have a Scrum Master, and they'll have a Product Owner, and then those teams will have a manager. So that manager will manage 20 or so people, 21 odd people. And when we say manage, what they're typically doing is they're helping them with their career. So they will help the teams manage their careers. They will also, as we talked about, set the constraints for the team from a risk-based perspective. they'll also make sure that the teams are getting the right training, etc., from the organisation. So from a number of managers to people perspective, we normally have around 1 to 20 kind of manager approach. The other approach I've also seen is where the managers really are just more career managers, and therefore this tends to be where you've got a bit more more liquidity in the organisation. And what I mean by that is there are resource pools, which I'm not a big fan of, to be honest. But if you do have resource pools in agile organisations, they typically have, or some of the ones I've seen that work well or better are those where they have a profession manager. So you as a profession, for example, you are an engineer, so you do test and development. You would have a career manager who would help you with a group of your peers manage your career to make sure you're getting the right professional development, mentor and coach you, etc. So that would be one of the things you'd expect to see that organisation do. Then you'd have project managers running parallel to that, so not your career manager. And those project managers would be assigned to projects, and they would then reach out to the pool and pull together appropriate teams based on that. But it would mean then you've got somebody looking after your career horizontally or orthogonally to somebody actually trying to get you to deliver projects, because there is the pull is different. There's a tension between, as a project manager, product lead, you're trying to make sure that the product gets shipped as quickly as possible, and there is tension trying to make sure that the team are just focused 100% on your piece of work rather than having off-site going on training courses, improving that in person's career. So there's one is a short-term. The product project manager's got very short-term objectives typically, whereas the career manager for the individuals tend to have more of a long-term view on the employees and their welfare. That's the other approach I've seen. In that sense, they're less likely to. They're also managing and should be have oversight of the risk that the project managers are putting the organisation under. So above not only do the managers have some sight into the career management, their other job would be they would be matrixed across the projects and products to make sure that the constraints are being applied across the products and projects. But that would be done as a matrix. That's the other example I've seen work reasonably well, especially with some of the systems integrators where they're doing Agile with resource pools. So that's the answer to that question around example organisational designs I've seen at a pretty high level. Are there any other questions?
Okay, so that concludes the question and answer session. We would like to thank you, Tony, for your brilliant presentation, and thank you everybody for joining today. We will make the recording available afterwards, and we'll send you the link. We look forward to your future participation at one of our events, and for further information about our upcoming conferences and webinars, please refer to our website.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.